In the years after World War II, Sherwin-Williams and PPG Industries needed to replace wartime manufacturing contracts, and they found their answer not by inventing something new, but by making you forget something that already worked. A $3 crystalline powder converts rust into permanent molecular armor and has been doing it since before the Roman Empire. There is one step in this process that almost everyone gets wrong, not because it is complicated, but because it looks like nothing is happening. And that single error is the reason most people who have tried this conclude it does not work. That step is coming. Stay with this until it arrives. The global paint and coatings market was worth $162 billion in 2022, according to Grand View Research. Every dollar of that depends on metal rusting. Not quickly, not catastrophically. Just steadily, reliably, expensively enough that you keep coming back. From the manufacturer's side, that is a perfect system. From yours, it is a subscription you never agreed to sign. Here's what got replaced, and when, and by whom. In 1906, a Birmingham metallurgist named Thomas Watts Coslett received a British patent for phosphate conversion coating, a process that used phosphoric acid to chemically transform iron and steel at the molecular level. The critical word is transform, not coat. The rust on your metal is iron oxide. Phosphoric acid reacts with iron oxide and converts it into iron phosphate. A different compound entirely, one that bonds permanently to the underlying metal and is far more stable than the iron it came from. The corrosion becomes the protection. The failure becomes the structure. The United States military recognized this immediately. By the 1920s, the Parker Rust Proof Company in Detroit, drawing directly from Coslett's research, had refined the process into what soldiers would call Parkerizing. According to the ASM Handbook on Surface Engineering, every American military firearm issued during World War II went through a manganese phosphate conversion process before it ever reached a soldier's hands. The military chose it because it performed in the Pacific monsoon and the North African desert without maintenance windows, without chipping, without flaking. A conversion coating has nothing to flake. It is not on top of the metal. It is part of the metal. Then the war ended. The paint industry, which had been producing primers and coatings for military equipment under government contract, needed a consumer market. Sherwin-Williams alone reported wartime revenues that required a peacetime equivalent to sustain. The answer was not to educate the public about metal chemistry. The answer was simpler. Build a distribution network, put the product on the shelf next to the problem, and call it modern. The knowledge of phosphate conversion did not disappear. It stayed in every automotive factory in the country. Every car body built today is still zinc phosphated before paint is applied, because the engineers know the paint cannot protect what the conversion coating has not prepared. But that knowledge stayed industrial. The homeowner got told to prime and paint. They did, for 70 years, and counting. Before we get into the build, it is worth understanding how old this actually is, because the age of the knowledge is the argument. The Journal of Archaeological Science published analysis of ancient Egyptian iron artifacts showing systematic acid treatment with acidic palm wine residue, not by accident, but as a deliberate preservation step, documented across multiple sites from the late period onward. The craftsmen did not know the word iron phosphate. They knew the acid bath made their tools last. Medieval Japanese swordsmiths used targeted acid patination as part of the finishing sequence. The distinctive Hayman line on a finished blade is partly the result of clay differential, but the overall metal darkening involved controlled acid exposure that modern metallurgical analysis confirms produced early-stage phosphate conversion. The Romans used vinegar baths on iron fittings, a practice noted by Pliny the Elder in Naturalis Historia, Book 34, and verified by the chemistry of surviving artifacts. Coslett did not discover this process. He named it, systematized it, and patented it. The knowledge is older than every civilization you were taught to admire. You cannot sell a $162 billion industry on a powder that costs $3 and lasts a lifetime. That is not a conspiracy. That is math. You have been looking at this chemistry your whole life and just never connected it to the price tag. The gray-black finish on a quality hand tool, that is phosphate conversion. The matte dark coating on military surplus hardware, that is Parkerizing. The reason a 50-year-old cast iron pan can sit in a barn for a decade and come back to life with a wire brush and oil, that is a phosphate matrix that formed during its original manufacturing acid wash. You have been surrounded by this chemistry since birth. Nobody told you what you were looking at, because naming it would have raised a very inconvenient question about what you actually needed to spend money on. The mistake is not in the last step. It is in the first. Hold that thought. We are almost there. Here's what you need. I want to be honest with you about every number. Phosphoric acid. You can buy it as a crystalline powder or as an 85% liquid concentrate. The powder form, available through online chemical suppliers and sometimes through pool supply stores where it is sold as pH down or pH reducer, runs between $3 and $8 for a quantity that will treat more metal than you will own in the next several years. If your hardware store carries a product labeled navel jelly or rust converter, check the active ingredient. If it says phosphoric acid, that is the same chemistry in a diluted and far more expensive delivery format. Buy the pure version. The cost difference is a factor of 10 for identical results. You need warm water, a plastic or glass container. Not aluminum, because phosphoric acid reacts with aluminum just as aggressively as it reacts with iron. A wire brush, which most people already own. Gloves and eye protection, because a dilute acid solution will still hurt if it gets in your eyes, and that is not a detail to improvise around. And you need a sealing oil. Linseed oil is the traditional and scientifically best choice, available for under $10 a quart at any hardware store, and a quart will last you years of regular use. Mineral oil works. Old motor oil, if aesthetics are not the concern, absolutely works. The oil is not finishing, the oil is chemistry. That will be clear in a moment. That is the complete list. No primer, no specialty rust-inhibiting formula, no trip to a trade supply house. Everything is at a hardware store or already on your bench. The one thing that might not be costs $3 to order. Here's the one thing most people get wrong. It is the entire reason this technique has a reputation for inconsistency, and it is the reason I planted that warning at the beginning of this. They wipe the acid off too soon. That sounds too simple to matter. It matters completely. When phosphoric acid contacts iron, bare iron or rusted iron, it begins converting the surface to iron phosphate. The reaction is visible. The metal darkens. A gray to matte black patina forms, and most people see that color change and assume the process is done. They wipe it off at 4 or 5 minutes. They get partial conversion, a layer thin enough that the next frost or the next morning dew finishes penetrating through it and the rust resumes underneath. Then they say, it did not work. Think of it like a weld that was pulled apart before it cooled. The surface looked finished. The bond was not. The full phosphate conversion, the depth of penetration into the iron grain structure that creates real corrosion resistance, takes a minimum of 20 minutes at room temperature and closer to 30 if the metal is cold or the solution is dilute. The color change at the surface is the signal that the reaction has started. It is not the signal that the reaction is finished. The chemistry is still working in a layer you cannot see. That invisible work is the product. You have to let it finish. So here is the sequence, exactly as you will do it. Start clean. Remove any oil or grease from the metal surface first. A single wipe with acetone or paint thinner takes 90 seconds, and it is not optional. Oil blocks acid contact the way wax blocks water-penetrating wood. If the acid cannot reach the iron surface, there is no reaction, and you waste your time and your acid. Remove loose, flaking rust with a wire brush. Not to get back to bare metal, because you do not need to, but to remove the structural rubble sitting on top of bonded rust. The acid will convert what remains. Brush until the surface feels firm and seated. That is the only test needed. Mix your solution at roughly 1 part phosphoric acid concentrate to 10 parts warm water. If you are using the crystalline powder, target 3 to 5% by weight. For a quart of water, that is between 1 and 2 tablespoons of powder. Warm water at around 45 degrees Celsius, which is just above comfortable for your bare hand, accelerates the reaction without changing its chemistry. Cold water works. Warm water works faster, and faster means more thorough within the 25-minute window. Apply the solution generously. A brush, a spray bottle, pouring it over the piece and letting it sheet down. The method is less important than saturation. You want the surface fully wet. Set a timer for 25 minutes. Put it down. Do not come back early to check. Do not wipe a corner to see if something is happening. The reaction is invisible after the initial color change. The chemistry happening below the surface is the part that matters, and it requires you to leave it alone. At 25 minutes, return. The surface should be uniformly gray to dark gray to near black. Take a dry cloth and wipe it gently. You're removing the white powdery residue of spent acid and unreacted phosphate salts on the surface. That residue has no structural value. What remains underneath is the conversion coating, iron phosphate, molecularly integrated into the surface of your metal, as stable as the mineral it now resembles. Now the oil, and the reason it is part of the chemistry rather than cosmetic. The phosphate conversion layer is microscopically porous. That porosity is not a flaw in the process. It is inherent to the crystalline grain structure of iron phosphate, and it is what makes the oil step work. Linseed oil penetrates those pores and polymerizes inside them. Polymerization means the oil hardens in place, not just on the surface, but mechanically locked within the pore structure of the metal. Research published in the journal Corrosion Science confirms that phosphate conversion coatings with an oil post-treatment achieve corrosion resistance equivalent to or exceeding 2-coat paint systems in standardized salt spray testing. 2-coat paint systems, from a $3 powder and a tablespoon of linseed oil. Apply the oil thin. This is the second place people go wrong. They apply it thick, it stays tacky for days, they wipe it off in frustration and lose the benefit entirely. Apply barely enough to see, then wipe almost all of it back off. What remains in the pores is what matters. If you have a heat gun, a pass of warm air accelerates the polymerization. Room temperature works fine. 4 hours later, run your thumb across the surface. If it comes away clean, the oil has set. If there is slight residue, give it another hour. Once it is dry to the touch, the coating is finished. That metal is now more resistant to corrosion than it was the day it was manufactured, not because you added a barrier on top of it, because you changed what the surface material is. Now think about what this means at scale, and I want you to follow the math because it is the part of this that most people stop short of. 1 container of phosphoric acid powder at $3 treats 5 to 10 pounds of metal surface depending on dilution and application. 1 chain link fence panel treated over a weekend will outlast the posts it hangs on. A set of garden tools treated before first winter will come out of the shed in spring looking identical to how they went in. Not because rust was stopped, but because the surface is no longer chemically reactive to the conditions that cause rust. A truck frame, wire brushed and converted, can hold a vehicle together for a decade more in climates where untreated steel would be through the floor in 3 seasons. Scale to a property. A working homestead or a small farm has 60 to 80 pieces of ferrous metal actively rusting or at active risk at any point. Hinges, brackets, gate hardware, plowshares, hand tools, stovepipe joints, pump housings, trailer components, well casing clamps. Treating all of it runs under $30 in acid and oil, 1 weekend of focused work. The alternative is replacing each piece as it fails, which, across a decade, is measured in hundreds of individual purchases and an ongoing relationship with hardware store parking lots. There is one more thing about what this process enables, and it took a long time to surface. And when it surfaces, it changes how you think about the entire problem. You do not have to wait for rust to start treating metal. New bar stock, new hardware, new tools straight out of the package. The factory finish is cosmetic protection at best. Running new metal through a phosphoric acid bath before it ever sees weather means the conversion layer forms on fresh, undamaged iron. And according to the ASM handbook, coatings applied to clean, bare metal achieve greater coating weight and finer grain structure than coatings applied over existing oxidation, meaning deeper porosity, better oil retention, and longer service life. The best time to treat new metal is before it ever sees its first winter. The second best time is right now. There are no replacement intervals after conversion and oil. No reapplication schedule once the linseed oil has polymerized. A treated piece of metal does not announce a maintenance window. It holds quietly without asking anything further of you. The honest limits deserve their own moment because they are real and they matter. This process works on ferrous metals, iron and steel. It does not work on stainless steel, aluminum, copper, or brass. Stainless steel's passive chromium oxide surface prevents the phosphoric acid from reaching reactive iron. Aluminum reacts with phosphoric acid differently and produces a different compound with different, and less useful, protective properties. If you're working with non-ferrous materials, this is not your answer for those materials specifically. The coating is gray to black. It is not a cosmetic finish. If you need painted color on top, the phosphate layer is an excellent primer base. That is exactly how every automobile is built, but the coating itself is industrial in appearance. For hinges, tools, structural hardware, and farm equipment, that is irrelevant. For a decorative garden gate, you paint over it and everything works better for it. Keep treated metal dry for the first 24 hours after the oil application before the linseed oil has fully polymerized. Getting it wet in that window before the oil has set can interrupt the sealing step. Treat in the evening, leave it under cover overnight, and you will never encounter this limitation. Those are the real limits. They are not large ones. The ancient Egyptian craftsmen who soaked their iron tools in acidic palm wine residue were doing this without a name for it. The Japanese swordsmiths who used acid patination were doing this without Coslet's patent. Pliny the Elder noted the practice of vinegar treatment on Roman ironwork in the 1st century, not understanding the mechanism, but observing the result. Thomas Watts Coslet put the chemistry into words in 1906 and gave it to anyone who could read a patent. The military used it through both world wars because it outperformed every alternative in every climate. Then the market replaced it, not with something better, but with something that required buying again. The phosphoric acid is $3. The linseed oil is at the hardware store. The metal you already own is sitting there oxidizing. Physics does not care about quarterly earnings. The chemistry has not changed since before the Roman Empire. It did not stop working. It was made inconvenient to remember. Now you remember.